Well, well, thank you for the invitation. Sorry for my English. I'm trying to do my best. If you've listened to a little French accents, that is true. Because I was my second language. But I like to share with you the main topics of the debates about the drug inequality in Latin America. Why I decided to present that? Because I think that this debate, this strong debate, which took part in the last decade, is a good starting point for triggering discussions about the current trends in Latin American society. And second, because this debate was really a very important realm of a strong discussion among different social sciences, especially between economic and sociology. So I think it's a good starting point to discuss about the relationship between democratization, economics, sociology, civil society, and basically to understand what is happening now in Latin America. So my first point that in Latin America, the Gini index, the index which showed the distribution of wealth in the country, has grown basically between 2003 and 2013. First, in most of the 10 countries which turns to the left or center-left during the post-neoliberal period. And then also in countries which remains at the right, like Peru or Colombia, and Mexico is maybe the exception, the only country where inequality didn't drop in the last decade. Also, poverty and extreme poverty decreased. You can see here the drop in the Gini index from 1992 until 2014.
What is the Gini fixer?
This is the Gini index. This is 2003.
2003.
Yeah. This is the peak. Yeah. And this is there was also a decrease in poverty and in extreme poverty. This is Latin America as a whole. This entire country. So we can see the same trends. The peak of the decreased poverty was in 2002, and then you have like a small decrease, like a stagnation of the trends and the drop of inequality. That situation, the drop in inequality, triggered an unknown optimism both among the left-wing administrations and multilateral organizations such as World Bank, IMF, and maybe they began to dream our persistent and historical inequality was beginning to be tackled. It was the first time that over 4 decades of hard times and bad news, for the first time in our region, we had the idea of good news and the idea of maybe we are in a turning point of our historical inequality. For economists, not for sociologists, for economists, and for more traditional or orthodox economists. As you can imagine, there was not a simple answer, and many debates around the topic came up. What does the Gini index really show? It's the first debate. What kind of inequality are we talking about? How to depict the social impact of a change in the Gini index? In other words, how to translate quantitative indexes into qualitative indexes. What does it mean in terms of experience of life or everyday life? The drop in 0.3 or 0.03 in the Gini index. So that's a very important debate among different social sciences in our continent. And how sustainable the drop of inequality would be, and so on. There were also questions for it. Yeah, there was, sorry. I want you. I'm not sure it's here. there was also a question about the place of politics and social movements. How have they contributed to the drop of inequality, and what happened with other dimensions of inequality, and so on. The drop of inequality fostered more new questions than definitive answers in a very rich and ongoing debate among countries and disciplines. For that reason, I like to share with you the main trends and debates about the drop of inequality in America in order to think together if our experience in the last decade can be useful for moderation in the case of Africa and South Africa, and moreover, as the pink tide, the wave of left-wing government is ebbing in the region, I'd like to describe the current situations regarding inequality and the challenge for the future. So, So I shall say, for after over 4 decades of our times, the last decade brought about good news in terms of inequality performance in the region. From 2003 to 2015, inequality decreased. The drop was especially important till 2010, afterward we had witnessed different situations depending on the country. The drop has been sharp also in terms of absolute poverty if compared to relative poverty. And that is very important. Why? Because for a drop in relative poverty, the poor have to improve more than the upper classes. And that did not happen. Latin American upper classes gained a lot both under post-neoliberal administration as well as during neoliberalism. So how you can speak about and argue about the drop of inequality if the rich gained a lot during the last decade? So the situation is very complex, and I think that for me that's a problem, because the poor gained or improved the situation, at the same time the rich improved the situation too, both in every country in the region, even in Ecuador and Venezuela. Venezuela is difficult to capture the data. So that's the problem in order to make an appraisal about how equality, or how equal were the post-neoliberal governments, administrations in our region. And even the most optimistic, like the multilateral organization, has a cautious, guarded optimism. In fact, we know that there has been a relative improvement in each and every country and in every social group. But inequality, however, in Latin America remains to be highest around the world. 3 countries exhibits more than 0.5 and 0.8 point. 3 countries exhibit a Gini index than 0.5 and 8 more than 0.45. This last number is important because there is no single European country with those figures, and just one in Asia, Malaysia, whose Gini is 0.45. So this is a really modern optimism, a very cautious optimism. And we should put forward, for me this chart is very shocking, because we should forward our recent improvement in perspective. The balance is quite shocking. This chart shows that this is 1980, this is 2005. It shows that the region needed 25 years to reach the same poverty level that it had in 1980, a very bad period, the last decade. So when we make an evaluation about the performance of the last government, it's important to know the time required to arrive to reach the same situation in terms of poverty that the region had in 1980. So, and the region needs 15 years to recover the same GDP per capita that the region had in 1980. So the impoverishment and the crisis in our region was really very important and very deep, and we needed a lot of a decade just to reach the same level that we had 2 decades before. So my optimism and that of many of my colleagues is even more cautious. Why? Because even if all in all the pie did grow, first, functional distribution between labor and capital remains quite stable in many countries, and in others improved just a little bit before 2006. Second, as I said, elites improved even during the post-neoliberal administrations. Some researches show that the top 1% keeps on holding a great part of national wealth, about 25 or 30%. So it remains, and this 25 or 30%, given the fact that the pie grew in the last decade, in absolute terms, is a more important portion of wealth than it used to be in the 90s. So there are also new questions about the scope of our income data. We know that our surveys can capture the income at the top of the structure. And some sociologists, such as Fernando Cortés in Mexico, for example, argues recently that our data only represents 30% of the national income. This is because most of the wealth is offshore, because we can't value accurately the patrimony of the rich and for other problems. My point is that maybe we know very little about wealth, income, and inequality, less than we supposed we knew until now. And for that, maybe we are beginning to wonder if inequality is even deeper than we supposed. Because until now, we suppose there is like consensus about that we had data about the 60% of the national income. But now the new surveys say that maybe they have that, 30%. So really we speak about something that we know very little. And the bottom line is maybe inequality is even deeper than we supposed to be. And for this chart shows that the cycle of reduction of inequality didn't stop completely. Indeed, this show compare the reduction of the change in Gini index from 2000 to 2010 and from 2010 to 2014, and the minus is better, minus is more, minus is seen that the Gini index is a drop in Gini index. So it didn't really, that is until 2014, so we need more current data. But it shows that there are different paces in the reduction of inequality. The reduction of inequality didn't really stop, but the pace, the rhythm is really slower than it used to be a couple of years ago. So, and there are different paces by country. That's the question. So, I go back to my question is, did the inequality drop in the region? And as sociologists like to see, we like to say, it's very complex, and our answer is yes and no, and we should draw a more complex picture, in my opinion. So my point is, how can we assess altogether the GDP increase per capita, so the pie growth, the Gini index drop, and the labor income share stagnation? In other words, how we can figure out the complexity of the current social situation. The following question is, what we conclude about inequality in general based only on these numbers pointing to a reduction in the Gini index? What I mean, that even if the reduction of the Gini index is a fact, its consequences in terms of inequality are not self-evident. Not self-evident. I mean, we need to translate these quantitative indexes in terms of qualitative experiences or qualitative indexes and the impact of the Gini index reduction in other dimensions like health, housing, education, etc. We know that the income gap between what we really know, what does in fact the reduction of Gini index really basically means? That means that compared to the last decade, the income gap between the last and the more qualified became narrower when we compare to the situation in the 90s. If you want specifically what the Gini index means, the reduction of Gini index is a reduction in the income gap between the less and the more qualified into the labor market. That's all. That's all that we can expect and hope in terms of inequality. We are really satisfied. We are really happy for that. That's all. It's really, that is our idea of reduction of inequality. For that reason, of course, I'm not an economist. I mean that the discussion with economists foster new questions about the meaning of inequality and equality for different disciplines and for different political positions. So for me, for that reason, I'm interested in that debate. What I said that was what all we should expect in terms of inequality, and this improvement, the improvement of inequality of equality in Latin America is much more limited if we adopt a global perspective and put forward an international comparison. Korsenewit and Moran analyzed income distribution across 95 countries. They built a worldwide income distribution and appraised it as if the world was a single country. In each decile, they put different national deciles. Even the poorest, there are two very interesting and sad conclusions in this work. Even the poorest among the Western countries are ranked at the top in the world scale. But for us, the bad news is, whereas in Latin America, for example, the Nicaraguan decile 9, the rich or the global rich, or Bolivian 8, stand for decile 3 or 4 in a world scale. So, even considering the last decade's poverty and Gini reduction, in terms of an international comparison, most social groups in Latin America still rank among the lower deciles. And so the point, or my point is, any conclusion and any idea about social inequality reduction should be framed into a global perspective. Well, let me see some, because that is that's the next points are the strong topics of debate in the last decade about why inequality grew up in Latin America. So let me see some explanatory factor of income inequality reduction in Latin America in recent years, from, or at least, or the point of view of economists. In 2013, 135 million of Latin Americans took part of conditional cash transfer programs. 25% of our population is covered by this kind of program. You can see here the countries, the number of house, the population, and the and the percent of the population covered by this kind of country. And you can see that even in countries without any or with few present social policy like Paraguay, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, they developed conditional cash transfers. Cash transfers are a right to America to stay, to stand, to keep here, and they are part of our social and political life. And the last column, this one, stands for the effort for this kind of policy. Yeah? And you can see that it's really very limited, very low. It stands for 0.34, so 0.34 of the entire national budget. I mean that even if this kind of programs are very popular in the region, the state spend little money on them, so it's a very good business because you have a very improvement in Gini index, you have something that controls the social conflict, and they put money in the popular sector, so conditional transfer are something that are right to stay in our countries. So we can imagine that states could still manage to make a greater effort to ensure better living conditions for the population. The second factor explaining for economists the drop in equality in the region is the non-contributory pension for seniors adults. So more than 33% of the elderly in Latin America are beneficiaries of non-contributory pensions in the last year. So in the recent years, governments put forward cash programs focused on the poorest elderly who had been deprived from the right to ordinary pension. For example, you have the case of Bolivia that the entire 100% of the population and more than 65 years receive a non-contributory pension called bono dignidad. So this is like a new kind of policy or expansion of a new kind of policy. But now this is the most important chart. Take a look at this is the most important chart because this is the key of the Gini reduction economic explanation. You can see that this is different countries in Latin America, and that's the reduction of the Gini in different countries. So you can see that each column represents a country. In each country, the chart of the Gini reduction and different factors explaining it. And what you see in blue is the part of the Gini reduction awarded to labor income improvement. And as you can conclude, the blue part in most countries is the largest one. So bottom line, we can now conclude that most of the Gini reduction is due to labor income improvement, in part links to the new protective labor laws that we call the re-regularization of the labor market after the neoliberal period of flexibilization. So, in a sort of meta-analysis, Levy and Shady assessed that about a third of half of Gini index reductions in recent years can be explained by labor income improvement among the poorest. Cash transfer account for about 25% of this reduction, and non-contributory pension account for an extra 5%. So there are, just to finish my general appraisal, let me say that Latin American countries implemented other three policies which had an impact of inequality. First, there was an increase in educational coverage in every country, and above all, including the poor and the rural population. So it was a success for Latin American, for every Latin American countries, the increase on educational coverage. That is was very important. Inequality in terms of educational quality remains at the current challenge. But second, Latin American countries put forward different policies to allow access to health care for uninsured population. So the goal is not to leave people without any health care. Invested on infrastructure such as housing, roads, and different kinds of services. An important infrastructure. There was an important investment on infrastructure, such as housing, roads, and different kinds of services in different countries, but an important infrastructure deficit prevails in the region. But for me, if I make a general appraisal about what the post-neoliberal government administration let us balance is that they try to, well, for me the good news is that they build a safety net, because for the first time we have almost no people without any income and without at least basic health care. It's like a contradiction, but it's like it's as the post-neoliberal administrations could accomplish the goal of the neoliberal policy that was the idea to build a safety net. We know that neoliberal governments in Latin America only make the situation of the poor worse, but the post-neoliberal government, at least if you can be optimist or pessimist like that, but at least they could build a kind of safety net for the more excluded parts of the population. The discussion is that's enough, that's not enough, that's all the discussion, that's enough, it's enough, we are satisfied with that. But I think that we had, maybe it's now, maybe the new administration are destroying a little bit this kind of safety net, but we had a safety net we didn't have a decade ago. What happened with other dimensions of inequality during the same period? It's interesting that the main trends concerning gender, native Latin Americans, and Afro-Latin Americans are similar. Inequality dropped, but much more in terms of educational attainment and life expectancy than in terms of income. That means that when questions about money or power, changes are harder to perform. Moreover, compared to the 90s, there was no reduction concerning educational and spatial segregation. But, well, the question is, what is happening now? Post-neoliberal period is end. So what is happening now? Or maybe I could say, what is going to happen? Well, as you know, the commodity boom and the pink tide, the wave of left-wing government, ended at the same time and closely interrelated. New times aren't very favorable for the fight against inequality, both for political and for economic reasons. For me, the novelty is the following. For the last 4 decades, the entire regions underwent a kind of homogeneous process. The 80s were marked by democratization without economic growth. The 90s were the neoliberal era, and the last of the present decade was characterized by the pink tide and the commodity boom. And now, on the one hand, there is no one and clear economic trend across the world. Not a big crisis or a boom in Western countries. Open market trends are challenged by a new protectionist one in the US or even in Europe, Brexit. And in our South, there are not homogeneous political trends either. Some countries in Latin America remain at the left. Bolivia, Ecuador, others shift to the center or the right, extreme right, like maybe Brazil. And in that context, each country is trying to build its own economic, foreign, and political strategy. And there are separational alliances, but not a clear trend like in the past decade. So, in terms of inequality, we saw that the drop of inequality stagnated in the southern coast, in Argentina, Uruguay, in Brazil. Andean countries that also there is a stagnation of in the drop of inequality in Central America post 2010. In terms of social policy, there are not many changes, but it's possible that in some countries there will be a new wave of labor reforms and flexibilization of the labor market. And this is my concern, given that the protection of the labor market was the main driver of the drop of inequality. We can fear that the gains in terms of inequality won't last or will be reversed by a new wave of labor reforms. And so the main question is if we were in the midst of a long-term process of inequality decrease, or the last 12 or 40 years were just a short-lived interlude in our persistent inequality. So maybe we knew when there went a drop of inequality, and we began a new cycle of a new increase in inequality for the next, I don't know, 15 or 20 years or more. So it's my last chart. Then I think that today we really know what to do to reduce poverty and inequality. This is not a problem for me. The problem is not a lack of knowledge. There are plenty of papers, books, proposals, congresses, consultancies, expert proposals, hundreds of measures and policies which on price, labor market protection, social policy, tax reform, education. Okay, we know what to do. We know what to do. The problem is that all that these measures imply a change in the balance of power. For that reason, for example, a progressive tax reforms. Almost 10 countries in Latin America is trying to make a tax reform, but in every country there is a very big opposition of the elites against any kind of progressive tax reform, because they know that this is the key factor in the income distribution. So, for me, it's not a technical power; it's a political and social problem. It's, of course, a problem of power. But just for finishing, there is something that we don't know what to do, and for me that is the big question: how to build a new economic model showing growth and social justice. That's the problem in America. We don't know how to do that. There is not model for that. We had a very old model, the idea of industrialization, that it's not going to happen. The world changes, the industrialization, like integrated, like a cohesive strategy for our society, didn't happen, and it won't happen. So nobody really know what to do in Latin America. This is, and specific for big country in terms of demographic strength like Argentina, Brazil, Colombia. So that's a problem for our country, and we don't know how to do that, and there is no model for that, and nobody really know what to do. And we were looking for that for decades, and we couldn't find it. And I wonder if it's possible, it should be, but we have not the answer yet. And this is the Latin American, for me, this is the Latin American drama, in my opinion. This is the question that, for what we had no answer.